Hi, everybody. Welcome to Book Passage. Good evening. I guess it is evening on both coasts right now. I want to welcome you to our author event today. My name is Allison Bainbridge. I can't wait to hear our guest authors discuss this entertaining and fascinating memoir, Fly Girl, about Anne Hood's adventurous years as a TWA flight attendant. At a time when flight attendants are having to deal with so many unruly and obstreperous and even violent passengers, the book reminds us that a flight attendant in the past was an alluring and desirable vocation. In 1978, in the tailwind of the golden age of air travel, flight attendants were the epitome of glamour and sophistication. Fresh out of college and hungry to experience the world and maybe one day write about it and join their ranks. After a grueling job search, she survived TWA's rigorous breach training academy and learned to evacuate 7 kinds of aircraft, deliver a baby, mix proper cocktails, administer oxygen, so many other things. I was actually in high school around that time, and my dream job was a stewardess, which of course was how we referred to flight attendants back then. However, I was devastated when I learned that barely 5 feet tall, I was too short. So that was really disappointing. As the airline industry changed, Anne began to write, even drafting snatches for her first novel, From the Jump Seat. She reveals how the job empowered her, despite its roots in sexist standards, packed with funny, moving, shocking stories of life as a flight attendant. Fly Girl captures the nostalgia and magic of air travel at its height and the thrill that remains with every takeoff. Anne is the author of the best-selling novels, The Book That Matters Most, The Obituary Writer and the Knitting Circle, and the memoir Comfort, A Journey Through Grief. Her most recent book is Fly Girl, a memoir, and then Kitchen Yarns, Notes on Life, Love and Food. She lives in Providence, Rhode Island, and in New York City. And we are thrilled to also welcome Andres Dubus III to discuss Fly Girls with Anne. Among his 7 books is the New York Times bestseller, House of Sand and Fog, a fabulous book you must read if you haven't. His most recent novel, Gone So Long, has been named on many best book lists. His new novel, Such Kindness, is forthcoming in 2023, as is his essay collection, Ghost Dogs, which will be released in 2024. He teaches full-time at the University of Massachusetts. So I want to extend a warm welcome to both of you, Anne and Andre.
Allison, thank you very much.
Thank you, Allison. And Andre.
Thank you for engaging this conversation with me. So I should do a full disclosure for our audience. You and I are dear friends, and we've known each other for many years. And the reason I want to preface, our conversation with that is I've known you for many years, my friend. And of course, we all who know and love you know that you were a flight attendant before you became a writer, and you began your first writings on a plane, on many planes, many flights. But I am just stunned at how much I learned not only about you, which I thought I knew you. I thought I knew all this. But I learned so much, as Allison said, we learned so much about the job of being a flight attendant and the time in which you were one. So, but there's so much more. There's so much I have to say. I adore this book. I think it's a really important book on many levels. Let's begin. I'm going to ask you, I think it's in the prologue, but how did this start? How did this, because this is not your first memoir. In fact, it's your 4th, is it not?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. It's so funny because over the years, just, at cocktail parties or dinners or whatever, when it would come out that I'd be a flight attendant, well, if somebody says to you, what do? You say you're a writer, you get words like, oh, have I read you? Have I read anything you wrote?
Or would I have heard of you?
Would I have heard of you, right? But you say you were a flight attendant and like the whole room wakes up, and I've known for years that the stories were engaging and people are so curious about, what's behind the alluring glamour of flight attendants. And I'll tell you, it was a perfect time to write it. I'm not exactly answering your question, but when we were in lockdown, and you couldn't even go to the grocery store and you're like washing your UPS boxes, out in the hallway, to sit every day and travel, to relive those days when I could and did go everywhere and anywhere at any time, it was really kind of a lifesaver for me to write this book when I did. But the idea to do it was implanted or imprinted in me when I was so young. We lived in Washington, D.C., and they were building Dulles Airport, and the Russians were in the space race, and they had sent that dog up into space. And although I was too young to know all this, in a political or historic way, the adults always talked about space. And they always talked about, we would go and watch them build that airport. And then we would talk about President Kennedy and would we get to the moon? My first Halloween costumes were as a space girl. Go made them out of like tin foil, and I had antennas. And so the idea of like kind of looking at the sky, and I was a dreamy kid. And so that kind of transmuted into looking at the sky and my dreams growing bigger. And we moved to Rhode Island, to a small town. And I was just that kid who had stars in her eyes. I really just wanted to see the world. And so that early love of the sky and of what's up there, combined with a desire to go, it seemed to me a natural fit to be a flight attendant. Plus, I thought I wanted to be a writer. I thought I needed adventures, and I thought, what a way to get it. I'll fly. I originally thought I'll fly for a year or two and I'll have so many adventures, then I'll write a good book. It worked out a little differently, but.
For those who are listening who don't know about Rhode Island or West Warwick, Rhode Island, can you describe a little bit about what kind of town that is if they haven't had the good fortune of reading some of your other memoirs or essays?
Yeah, not unlike, some of the towns you grew up in too, Andre, a mill town. All of the mills except one had closed though. So it was really high unemployment. I counted, there were 360 kids in my graduating class and only 18 of us went to college.
Wow.
And it was a town where there was homelessness and there was addiction problem, just sort of a classic New England mill town that's used to flourish and was now depressed. And a river ran through it, as most mill towns, must have. And the one remaining factory made soap. And so the river had this like yellow foam on it. It was so polluted. I will say that they have cleaned up the town and converted those mills to lofts, and it's come back to life in a way. But I happened to live in it when it was definitely on its decline.
So the reason I asked, it's a great description, and yeah, we grew up in similar towns, as you know. So all these years, it was clear to me that your way out of town, it's a kind of town, and nothing against those who stayed and nothing against the town, but you were always a bookish child. You loved to read. You were always drawn to the idea of becoming a writer yourself. And so for years I thought, okay, well, writing was her way out of town. It's not how she literally got out of town. Well, she had to get a job doing something. She became a flight attendant, and then years later she became a writer. Oh, how wrong I was.
You're wrong.
There's a great moment in the prologue, or no, it might be chapter 1. Are you going to read this? Because if not, I'll read just like 2 sentences from page 14 if you're not going to read it.
Read it, because I'm going to read about my first flight.
All right. I'll just read this short part.
Yeah.
I had a grand plan. I would be a stewardess, travel the world, have adventures, and then write novels about my travels and adventures. So you're in the advising office with your counselor about what you want to do. I want to be a writer, I told Mr. Stone. He looked baffled. And he said, people don't do that. Don't do what? Become writers, he said. Although I didn't understand it then, Mr. Stone was saying what anybody in my small mill town might say about becoming a writer. It was impossible. Writers came from different kinds of places, lived different kinds of lives. I looked around his office. Then how do we get all these books? Mr. Stone followed my gaze across the bookshelves. All of those writers are dead, he said. Melville, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, he was right. After I died, someone would find my unwritten novels, and I would be published posthumously, I thought, putting plan B in place. Then I want to be an airline stewardess, I announced. This was news to me, and it was so beautiful. That one of the most, surprisingly moving threads about the entire memoir, Anne, is the innocent girl you were and the steadfast desire to achieve the dream, to leave West Warwick, to actually see the world while getting paid to do it.
Yep.
And gather material for your writing. So speak to that if you would.
Yeah, yeah. I always carried notebooks. And I remember, Andre, you and I shared a stage. It must have been at the Newburyport Literary Festival one year when I was interviewing you, or we were in conversation about your book, I believe. And I had that composition notebook. And you said, oh, you write in those? I do too. And I always have. And so I would have stacks of those. And I always took notes. And one of the things I did, and, I tell students this all the time, listen, that was one of the greatest gifts of the job, was on a quiet airplane, especially when I flew international. Everybody had eaten, dim the lights, sit in that jump seat, and you just hear life unfold. You hear couples on an airplane. On one plane, there's passengers going to a funeral. There's passengers on a honeymoon. There's someone who's just found out they're pregnant. There's someone who's trying to figure out how to break up with someone. There's a happy family. There's a miserable family, and they're all there. It's just like this microcosm of people. And if you just pay attention to that and listen to that, it informed my writing so much. It still does. It still does.
You may know this wonderful line from John Irving, the great American novelist. He said, a novel should have all the high points in it and all the low points and nothing in between.
Oh.
And hearing you describe this, and of course it's in Fly Girl.
Yeah.
That's what you see when you're on a plane. People are at their highest moment or their lowest.
Right. I love that.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, I love that.
And so you seem to catch them in this liminal space of something extraordinary going on, as you just described. One of the many things I learned, I want to talk to you about research, because this is entertaining. It is moving. I want to get to the moving part later too. But it's incredibly instructive. I mean, I had no one's who has, people are going to learn a lot. I thought you apply, you get the job, waitress in the sky. Wrong.
Wrong again, Andre.
Again. Tell everybody, my God, you could have gone to medical school.
Oh my gosh, I know. It's interesting because I had the idea for the book before the pandemic, and I had the great good fortune of going out to California, where my old roommate lives, and one of my best friends who flew for 35 years. And I got to sort of talk to them and relive stuff and check facts and that. But I also read just about everything I could about the time in which I was flying, aviation history, the history of flight attendants, the labor history. And it's such a rich story and a big story. My first, 10 drafts were so terrible because I did that thing a writer does when they've researched. I wanted everyone to know just how much research I had done. And every draft came back with the note, we need more Anne. We need more Anne. Until around draft 10, when I was like, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting to tell my story. Flight attendants can do just about anything. And that's one of the reasons that I love the job and I'm grateful for it. Because not only did it teach me how to be in a room full of strangers, which as adults in the real world happens to you all the time, but it just gave me the confidence to do almost anything. I was, 23 years old, alone in Lisbon, Portugal, and my desire was to run up to my hotel room and hide. But you had the belief that I just came off a 747 filled with people and I handled, numerous problems and I took care of everything. And I can walk out of this hotel and, into a street of a foreign city with confidence.
Were you aware while writing it? Are you aware now that it's getting out in the world, that we see a real trajectory of innocent girl, innocent young woman, less innocent. By the time you're done being a TWA stewardess, flight attendant, not stewardess, you're still a young woman in your 30s. But my God, have you matured and grown as a person? you know, I always sense this about you, but what's throughout the early pages, which is so beautiful, is just how innocent a kid you were.
I was so
You
naive.
were a girl from West Warwick. You weren't very street savvy.
I wasn't street savvy at all. I'll tell them one story. It's in the book, so you know it. But we got this edict that we had to have meaningful conversations with at least 3 passengers per flight. And, you know, I was like, so I was that kid who, if you told me to do something, I did it promptly, and I did it well. And I obsessed about doing it well. I was that type A nervous kid, you know. And so, okay, 3 passengers. And I was working kind of short flights, you know, I don't know, St. Louis to Pittsburgh or something. And I was like, ready though, 3 passengers per flight. And this, you know, group of maybe 5 people get on, and they all have on black turtlenecks. And me at 21, I say, oh, look at you. You're all dressed in black. Are you a folk singing group? And they say, no, we're on our way to our mother's funeral. And I was like, of course you are. That's why everybody wears black. I wanted to just disappear. And I put my foot in my mouth all the time because I was just so naive. You know, oh man, when I think about it.
Yeah, that's a great scene, and there are, especially towards the second half of the book, towards all the way to the end, you pepper us with so many, heartrending and some tragic, some funny human moments 30,000 feet up. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what a coup it was for you to actually become a TWA, a flight attendant. I mean, that was like the Harvard of them all.
Absolutely. And they reminded you of that all the time. You know, I thought I want to do this and they'll hire me. Why not? You know, I love people. I want to travel. You know, why wouldn't they hire me? And I got rejected by Eastern Airlines and American Airlines. Then I started getting scared. I'm like, wait a minute. I thought this was going to be a shoo-in, you know? But I had my sights set on TWA or Pan Am because in those days, they were the only ones who flew internationally. Even though there was talk like United was going to start going to China. When I had my United interview and I was hired by them, they told me I was going to be based in Cleveland. And I'm like, this is not why I'm doing this job, you know, to move to Cleveland. No, I don't think so. But I started getting worried, like if American, which flew to a lot of little places, and Eastern, which only flew to Florida and the Caribbean and stuff, they didn't hire me. How am I ever going to get to the one I really want? You know, TWA, rigorous interview process. So the first one, pretty basic. The second one, maybe a 2-hour interview in a group, and then a one-on-one. And if you got past that, you had to go for a 3-day interview in Kansas City where they trained flight attendants. 3 days, and you were scrutinized the whole time.
And that's at the Breach Academy.
Yes, the Breach Training Academy.
Something I had never heard of. So before you tell that story, what your audience will find out in the wonderful book, but you were given tickets to fly down to Florida for your first interview. You think, well, Mom, Dad, if they're flying me down to Florida, I must have it. No, just because they're flying you down for the interview doesn't mean you'll get it. So you've gone through these gauntlet fires. Yeah. Now you're at the big place. Go ahead, Kansas City. Tell us about the City.
This place was like you've landed in the Jetsons house. If you remember the cartoon family, the Jetsons, modular furniture and round things that were supposed to be square, and square things that were supposed to be round, and consoles, and you lived in pods. I mean, it was crazy. It was really like the 60s. And I mean, it was the 70s, but it was really like something from a movie or something. And we stayed in those, you know, those pods. And I was like, I want this. Like once I got there, I already wanted it. But when I looked around and all the flight attendants who worked there, who trained other flight attendants in their beautiful Ralph Lauren uniforms, walking with such purpose, I was like, I have got to get this. I've got to do it. We went through so many psychological tests, math tests, but luckily very basic because, you know, in those days you sold liquor and you sold headsets and you had to at least be able to give change and, you know, do the accounting. And we used to do all this paperwork at the end. But anyway, it was just seemingly endless. And then they sent us off and, you know, you'll hear there was a rumor going around, and it was always going around, that somebody in our group was a spy and actually worked for the airline and was watching us even when it appeared, even when we were in our jammies kind of sitting around talking, we were being watched by one of us. So you were kind of getting really paranoid, And I became very friendly with the person I roomed with there, and she was from San Francisco, actually. And okay, we're gonna be roommates together when we're in the same training class. And so I get my acceptance letter and I write to her, and I can't wait. This is when I start. Do you start the same day? She said, "Oh, I didn't get hired," she said. And then she said, "But I'm relieved you wrote to me because everybody was sure you were the spy."
You thought you were the spy. Right. You had all the perfect qualities.
And that was my father's point. He's like, you didn't get hired by these other ones because they're not looking for you. The airline that wants somebody like you is going to, you'll know, they'll take you, they'll hire you. So luckily,
and a quick, your father is in this, and boy, did I love your dad in this book. He was just so wonderfully supportive of your dream to do that job.
Yeah.
Would you have a moment to read us a little bit from?
Yeah, so I thought I would read. I really vacillated because there's a great love story that happens in it, and I like reading the love story because I did meet, like, my long-term boyfriend was
4F,
47F,
47F, yeah.
Yeah, 47F. But I thought it would be more fun because we're talking about, the job and what was it and how did you do it and all of that kind of stuff. And so I thought I would read my first flight, but I just have to give a little bit of background, which is that we were scheduled to graduate from Breach Training Academy. And there was a big American Airlines plane crash, and a lot of planes were grounded, and they needed more flight attendants and more planes in the sky. And so they pulled us out. So we were really not done training. And they gave us all a ticket, and off we went, feeling 70% ready, maybe 60% ready. So I was so excited because my first trip was from Boston to LA on a big Lockheed 1011, like a jumbo jet, and a really fancy service. That's where they really, the caviar and the Chateaubriand. And I love to say this, and in coach, a 4-course meal. In coach, you got a menu and you picked one of 3 entrees, and then at the end, you do a after dinner drink service, and we'd put dry ice on the cart and water so that it like smoked, and then we walked out like we were in a cloud to like some Drambuie, amaretto. That was coach. Okay, but it was a very intense service and a very big plane, and I didn't feel confident on how to do that service. So this is what happened when I went on my first flight. Basically, I did everything wrong on that flight. I had imagined looking pretty, talking to passengers, effortlessly gliding down those beautiful twin aisles, offering martinis and Manhattans. Instead, I had trouble opening and setting up the carts. I was forever running up and down the lift because I kept forgetting things below. I forgot the rolls altogether, and another flight attendant threw them cold into the basket, growling over my incompetence. I couldn't keep the names of the wine straight. I couldn't open the champagne bottle, and I couldn't remember where anything was stored. Worst of all, I didn't know that I should have 2 pairs of shoes, the required high heels to be worn whenever we had our blazers on, in the airport, during boarding and deplaning, and a pair of flats for the rest of the flight, for the hours of standing and running up and down the aisles. That spare pair of flats got jammed into your regulation purse, but I had only high heels for 7 straight hours. By about hour 4, I was wincing with every step. My feet started to swell at hour 5, at which point I took off my high heels, and worked the rest of the flight in my stocking feet, something I could surely have been fired for had anyone noticed. And then I get to the hotel, and I get a club sandwich and a glass of wine, and put my feet up on the wall, and I cry because I'm so tired. The next morning, my alarm went off at 5 o'clock, and I dragged myself out of bed. I had an 8 a.m. flight, which meant I had to be at the airport at 7, which meant I had to leave the hotel at 6:30, which meant I had to be in the restaurant eating breakfast by 6. I showered and put on my beautiful uniform that smelled of stale smoke, put on my makeup, and went downstairs. While I was eating, a man came over to my table. "I'm a TWA flight attendant too," he said. "Are you okay?" Yeah, why? I worried he was one of the spies I was always hearing about. Maybe he'd heard I'd worked a flight in my stocking feet or that I forgot to help out and coach. Well, he said, you're sitting here in your uniform in the middle of the night. No, I said, I'm on the 8 o'clock flight, but it's 3 a.m, he said. I looked at my watch. It's 6, I said. On the East Coast, he said gently. It's 3 hours earlier here.
Oh, God. I remember both laughing and almost crying in that moment in the book. But that I'm so glad you read that section because, my God, one of the many things that gets expressed in Fly Girl, this is not a job for the faint of heart.
I know.
This is a job that takes immense physical stamina, I would say spiritual resilience.
Uh-huh.
I mean, do you want to talk about that? Never mind what you have to put up with the job itself once you get there, but the hours alone. Talk about that, if you would.
Yeah, Andre, you're so right. Like there was a time when I actually called in, not sick, but exhausted. I said that. I said, I'm fine. I cannot move. I am so tired. And that was like 5 years into my career. It wasn't like that I was new. You always have jet lag. The flights, and I flew international for quite a few years, and that really takes it out of you. And everything in the airlines is done by seniority, including which flights you work, which position you work on the airplane. And on long international flights, it even determines at what time you get to rest. And so the junior flight attendants rested about an hour after takeoff. So then we'd have to be up for 8 or 9 hours straight while the more senior ones got to sleep, at a more normal time or into the flight. I think that, somebody asked me the other day something about just, passengers and how bad human nature was. And I really didn't find that. For the most part, I was always kind of inspired, or at least I had this attitude, let me say. If somebody was really misbehaving or the whole crew or the whole plane was filled with crabby passengers because we were delayed or whatever, I used to always think, after this plane lands, I will never see them again. So you can put up with almost anything. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, this is going to be a long 5 hours, but goodbye. I will never see you again.
Can you tell that story about the famous baseball team that gets on board and you're all excited because your dad and you were big baseball fans? You're going to bring him a signed ball or something. Tell him, if you would. That's a horrible but great story.
Yeah. So at that point, most of my roommates, and I had 5, most of them had worked some flight with baseball teams or football teams. TWA was like the sponsor of so many of those teams. And I was like really excited. I wanted that experience because they'd come back and have these great stories or they'd have like box seats to Fenway Park because the Red Sox were just handing them out to the flight attendants. And so I was so excited. And I had the Philadelphia Phillies on, and they went to the World Series that year. So they were a very hot team and they had very big names. And so someone comes on board, like sort of a handler, and I was working in first class, and he said, oh, the Phillies are on, and like the big names are going to, and I knew those names. So I'm a big baseball fan. The big names are going to sit up here. And there are some regular passengers, but it's mostly, the Phillies. And I said, oh my goodness, I can't believe my luck. Like I'm going to get something for my dad signed by this particular player that he really liked. I was so excited. It was like they let on a busload of toddlers, or no, teenage boys, 12-year-old boys.
Yeah. Pre-adolescent boys. Yeah.
Oh, they were so horrible. They burped and they farted and they grabbed their crotch. And when I was giving the safety announcement, they all imitated me and wiggled their hips. This was in the first class. These were the big name ones. They made fun of everything. They wouldn't sit down. I mean, I was so tired. I think the flight was they were going from St. Louis. They just played the Cardinals to Pittsburgh or to Philadelphia. How long can that flight be? 2 hours. It was one of the longest 2-hour flights I've ever had. And I didn't even ask them, for that special thing. So I was like, I don't want anything from you guys.
No, and you still had to stand at the door and smile and be charming and wish them all a wonderful whatever. And then as they're leaving, you whisper under your breath, good riddance.
Yeah, good riddance. That's exactly.
Can I read you the last sentence of your prologue, my friend?
Yes.
Over the next 8 years, I would experience the end of the golden age of flying, watch major airlines go bankrupt, endure layoffs and a labor strike, and walk over 1,000,000 miles in high heels on flights, smiling as I served thousands of passengers. I worked in one of the most demanding, sexist, exciting, glorious jobs a person can have. I was a flight attendant. And I read your own sentences back to you just now, Ann, because I think it does a wonderful job of capturing the gray of it all. And you straddle so many worlds in this memoir. I want to ask you a few questions about research, because there's a lot in here. It's instructive as hell, just about the aviation industry and the profession of being a flight attendant, even more so about the aviation industry.
Yeah.
But sexist, glorious, all the colors are there. And certainly you don't pull back on any of that. You make it very clear that this is a time where, stewardesses, not flight attendants, were still considered to be brainless sex kittens.
That's right.
And yet here you are, a nascent, future major American writer, nobody's little sex kitten, and yet you love this work. So could you speak to all that if you could?
Yeah. It's so interesting. Of course, when you're just living your life, the historical impact or context of it, you don't realize it. But when I was looking back, I realized that being hired in 1978 gave me this really interesting perspective of the job of flight attendant, the changes in aviation that led to what flying is like today. And by that, I mean passing of deregulation, when the government stopped controlling airfares and let airlines fight for cities and routes and make their own pricing. That really was the beginning of the end. But I also still flew with people who had flown with Howard Hughes. They were flight attendants when he still owned TWA. So I was like in such this wonderful position. But women were in such an interesting position. 1978, some of my friends in college wanted to leave college engaged. They wanted to get married. They majored in whatever, like being a teacher or a nutritionist or whatever it was, with not that much interest in the job, but a big interest in finding a mate. While other women were fighting for equal rights. It was such a big time for feminism, abortion rights. Here we are again. But I mean, it was such a big time in history for women that I think I, like so many women in that era, had one foot still in the olden days and all that entailed, which includes the vision of flight attendants and the sexism that came with that, and one foot into the future, where we knew, wait, this has got to change. It's time to change things. All around me during those years, flight attendants were winning lawsuits against sexism, ageism. You had to quit when you were 32. Men just had won the right to be flight attendants 2 years before I started. I mean, we're so used to that now. Women could get married, but they had to fight for that. And then they had to quit when they had children. And a big part of my story is that we had weigh-ins and that we could be fired if we gained weight. And in fact, my roommate was fired.
And she'd only gained 5 pounds.
5 pounds. Yep. Yeah. So when we graduated from training, we were on probation for 6 months, and anything could and did happen. And you'd walk off your flight and they'd be waiting for you and come here. And there was a scale right there, and get on the scale, and they'd measure your hems, and they'd measure the height of your heels on your shoes and the dangle of your earrings. And if you had lipstick on, they used to say, we don't care if your makeup's faded or whatever, you always put on fresh lipstick at the end of the flight, so for deplaning. They checked all of that and they weighed you. And we were, to be hired, frankly, you had to be within a certain weight. So none of us had weight, should have worried about that. But you couldn't even gain a pound. And I came home one day and she had packed her bags, crying, and leaving the apartment.
It's an outraging, enraging, and heartbreaking moment in the book. One of the other things or experiences that gets expressed so beautifully, Anne, and you don't hit the reader on the head with it. Of course, you would never do that because you're too good a writer. But is the enduring friendships between women, mainly. Well, I know you've got a lifelong male flight attendant friend, but especially I was moved by the sisterhood between the flight attendants. Tell everybody, if you would, about your first. Here you are, a West Warwick girl with the foam coming off the Milltown River, and describe that apartment your dad found for you and your flight attendant friends in Boston.
Oh my God, this amazing apartment. And if anybody, who's listening knows Boston, these buildings, they're two towers called Harbor Towers, brand new at the time. And they sit right on the water. They look at Logan Airport, which was kind of ironic, so we say, oh, I think Linda will be home soon because I just saw a plane land and her flight's due in. It's near the Boston Aquarium. The area at the time was just starting to be gentrified. Faneuil Hall, which is now this bustling place, only had like maybe a quarter of it or half of it opened at that time. But this apartment was unbelievable. It was on the 16th floor. It had these sweeping views, like this bank of windows looking out at the water and the airport beyond. 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. The former tenants had left this big, beautiful brown chair that like 3 of us could sit in. It swiveled. So we had this wild chair and then all rented furniture. And the funny thing is 6 of us, right? But usually there were no more than 2 or 3 of us home because of flying. But it was really like a French farce of the doors opening and closing and people coming in and out, the phone ringing and who's coming in from a flight and who's leaving. But I have to say that every time I walked to that apartment, because you'd walk in and right to the left, there was that view. And we were so lucky. And I think we were there 3 months before we got evicted because we were too noisy.
But the landlord liked you so much, he could just put you on a lower floor, right?
I put us on the 6th floor.
Yeah. And then it all came, well, I don't want to say crashing down. It all changed because you had to move where? Tell everybody what happened. No more Boston's Harbor.
No more beautiful apartment looking out at Boston Harbor. So there were always rumors circulating. And I think this is true with all airlines. They're going to hire this many people. They're going to lay off people. They're going to start flying to this city. They're going to stop flying to this city. They're buying new planes. They can't pay for planes. All these contradictory things. And the rumors just swirled all the time. And there was a rumor that we might be laid off. And like we were still in our probation. And so I came home one day and my roommates were sitting and they were pale and shaken. And I said, oh no, we've been furloughed.
And you all got a letter, right?
Yeah, they were holding letters and they looked and they said, worse. I said, worse than being furloughed. And they said, we're being transferred to St. Louis. So TWA had just started a new hub in St. Louis. It became one of their biggest places to fly. And they were sending all the new hires there. We thought we were safe, but no, we got sent there. We left that beautiful apartment. We had 2 weeks. Leave that apartment, get a car because we didn't have a car in the city, drive out to St. Louis. And we lived in this sad little townhouse in the middle of a field. And our first night there, we had like bad wine, we're so depressed. And somebody's like, oh, I don't know, I feel scared. What's that sound? And then we realized it was no sound because we've been living in Boston, right? It was so quiet. We lived right near the airport. And the people we sublet the apartment from were flight attendants, a married couple, and they'd been transferred to Kennedy Airport. And they said, the good thing is you'll be more senior here. So you'll hold a line, you'll have a regular route so you can get out. And I thought, I'm moving to a place where the selling point is you can leave it.
But I thought we have a few questions I'm going to get to, and everybody who's listening, I will certainly save time for your questions for sure for Ann Hood. Something really sweet happened though, because now you're closer to your brother.
Yeah.
Talk about your brother Skip and that part of your life and his life.
Yeah. So my brother Skip was 5 years older than I am, and that was just kind of enough that we just kept missing different phases. I mean, we were really little and we would, build caves in the snow and stuff, but pretty quickly he was in adolescence and I was still in elementary school. And
you're 5 years apart.
Yeah, 5 years apart. And he was a big math kind of nerd and I was the reader. So we didn't really share that kind of thing. And then he went off to college when I was like 12, so 12 or 13. And so then he went off and had this big hippie life because it was the 60s, and he went off and he had all these great friends. And for many years, he was just sort of this like, I don't know, God or something to me. He wasn't like my brother. I didn't really talk to him, but he appeared with all these long-haired boys in their Volkswagen Bugs. And he just was very mysterious, But when I moved to St. Louis, he was living in Houston. He worked for Merck. He was an environmental engineer. And he had a lot of work in St. Louis. And so as it turned out, he would come and stay with me. And we really, at that point, I was 22 and he was 27. We caught up to each other. And we had so much fun. Yeah.
And that wouldn't have happened if you hadn't got transferred to St. Louis.
No. And I would even fly and lay over in Houston sometime. That would be a trip I'd take. And then I'd go to his house. We'd go out for Mexican food. And we were able to forge, that sibling relationship anew.
One of the things that comes through, and I don't know if you're consciously wanting this to come through, but pretty hard to carry on a relationship or see your family often. It reminded me, for years, I was a bartender for 10 years at various restaurants. And, I was always working when everyone else was having fun. Mm-hmm. And that comes through as well. But you were able to maintain your family. You were able to maintain relationships with boys and men. I want to get to a great question from Allison. Did you see the TV series Pan Am a few years ago? If so, how accurate was it?
I have to confess, I watched one, maybe two, and I was really dazzled by the period stuff, the costumes. I think it took place a little earlier than when I flew, but the costumes and the uniforms and what the passengers, like it had that Mad Men kind of feel to it. But I believe like the flight, she was a spy or something. And it didn't grab me because it wasn't really about the job and the life. And that's what I
weren't you a Trans Am spy?
I was a spy. I went on interviews. I spied.
And tell everybody, if you would, that moment where one of the women when you back up, when you talked about being on probation, that was for 6 months, wasn't it?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Once you got hired. And once you got through it, passing inspections, your lipstick's perfect, your hem's perfect, no bad reports. After 6 months, you get a contract or you're hired full time, right?
Yeah, you're hired full time. Yep, you're a regular employee, and they stop weighing you, things like that.
They do stop weighing you.
They do, unless they notice that maybe you need to be weighed. But you don't get those surprise weigh-ins and stuff anymore.
That's brutal. But there's this one moment where one of the women, I think she's your friend. You guys are still at the Breach Academy or somewhere in that part of your early career. And she's running late, so she does her nails on the plane.
Oh, yeah. This is a great story. Yeah. So this is actually my old roommate, Diane, who we're still very good friends. We text each other all the time. We've been together since we were 21, and interesting, Andres, it's a little aside, but she was an English major and she wanted to be a writer.
Wow.
And she had very much the same, from a small town in Ohio. Interesting. We had so many similarities. But she was on a job interview for Eastern Airlines, and they were flying her to Miami, and she was running late, and she realized she hadn't done her nails, and she thought that was really important. So she was in first class. There was a businessman next to her, and she did her nails. And it turned out he was one of the vice presidents. And he had said to her, "Where are you going?" And she said, "Oh, I'm interviewing to be a flight attendant for Eastern." He called the interviewer and said, "Don't hire her. She's rude. She did her nails in first class."
And they didn't hire her.
And they didn't hire. And her sister was an Eastern flight attendant. So she even had that sort of, legacy, but they didn't hire her.
And, then you had a young man in, I think, first class or somewhere towards the front of the plane where you were working, your station. And he was wearing a shirt and tie, but no pants.
That's my favorite story. I loved that so much.
Should we not spoil it and let people just buy the book?
Yeah.
Let's just say it's a wonderful story. And I thought, and you handled it beautifully. I have another question for you. Did you take advantage of the benefit of being able to travel, Or did you avoid getting on a plane when you weren't at work? Well, we know the answer to that.
And what a good question, though, because I could see someone avoiding it. No, I traveled all the time. After that 6-month probation, you also got unlimited free tickets. And back then, you also got free tickets on other airlines. That's not the case anymore. But like my friend whose sister flew for Eastern, her sister was based in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And we would just get off our flight, go right to the Eastern counter, say we want to go to San Juan. You sign some kind of paperwork, and off we went. I mean, I flew everywhere all the time. Yeah, it was great.
Well, as a follow-up from Allison, I think I know the answer, but do you enjoy traveling now?
Oh, you know it. You know that, Andre.
COVID was hell for you.
Oh my God. Thank God I was writing this book. I could remember what it was like. Yeah, the day, we had that, I'm telling something that everybody already knows, but we had that, before Omicron, there was this little window when things started opening up last fall. And I was reading the paper and I saw round trip tickets to Madrid for $186. And I looked at Michael and I'm like, we're going to Madrid, $186 round trip. And we were able to go in this little window, and then Omicron hit and everything kind of shut down again. So the minute I could, I went.
If those of you watching and listening have not read Anne's other memoirs, you need to, especially Comfort, about the loss of your daughter, Grace. The reason I bring that up is all 4 of your memoirs are really different. Each one takes on an entirely separate subject matter. And I wonder if you could talk about that. And I think it's refreshing. There are a few writers out there who I won't name names, and they're all wonderful memoirs, but it's very easy to sort of rehash the same territory as a human being when you're writing memoir. But all 4 of your memoirs deal with a different part of your life.
Yeah.
And Fly Girl is all about work and how it actually helped to shape you into an adult. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I love our dear friend Danny Shapiro has a line in an essay she wrote for Salon where she says a memoirist can't look out all the windows in her house. She has to look out one window at a time.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Isn't that great? And that's sort of what, and when I teach, I always have them read that essay because I think Patti Smith is a great example, right? Not that I'm comparing myself to the great Patti Smith, but she writes memoirs. She doesn't write autobiographies, and they're always different. She wrote the first one about her life with Robert Mapplethorpe and being a kid, the next one about the loss of her husband, the next one, each one is about one. And I think that's the strength of a good memoir.
And Danny Shapiro does the same. She does herself, right? In Hourglass, she's writing about family. I mean, her marriage. She thinks about her relationship to her father, etc. Mm-hmm. But this one, one of the many threads that stays with me with Fly Girl, Anne, is it drives some. I was on a panel years ago, and it was novelists, and somebody asked the novelist next to me, who is a very accomplished fantasy writer, well, when do you give a character their jobs? He says, well, I give them their jobs last. And I just sat there aghast. I didn't say anything. They last? Jesus Christ, I got to give them their jobs first. That's a huge part of someone.
Find them. Yeah, it helps to find them.
With this experience, and that's what, at the beginning of our talk tonight is what I meant, hopefully I'm clear about, is I've known you and loved you for so many years. I wasn't aware of just how deeply being a flight attendant shaped you into being a young woman who had, I think it probably helped you to step into the blank page, the nerve it takes to do that.
Absolutely. I think it did 100%. I don't know if I would have said that until I started writing this book. I mean, I did know its impact, but Andre, you and I have talked about this, that if you already know what the book's going to be about, it's not interesting to write, and it's certainly not going to be interesting to read. And I think part of what I discovered in writing this was, boy, did this make me. I mean, I would from time to time say, oh, my flight attendant's kicking in. You know what? My TWA flight attendant training's kicking in, or something like that. It would be true. But this is on a deeper level. And it was the writing of it and the re-examining of the girl I was with the woman I am. Yes.
And that's where it gets really poignant. especially those last 50 to 80 pages of so now you're I was about to say riding high. You are well, you're a professional. You're a professional. You're still, I mean, you're in 7-8 years. So, you're the senior on a lot of flights, but there are women who have been doing this for 19, 20 years. So they're above you, but you are now at that wonderful sweet spot in anybody's apprenticeship to a craft where you can step on any plane and do a wonderful job on zero notice.
That's right.
Strap on your tools and do the work. And what's so beautiful to witness as one of your readers is this slow evolving into full agency, which is really sort of remarkable, given that I'm talking about a young woman, an attractive young woman in a sexist industry who finds her power.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And then, I won't get to the last image. That last image is one of the most beautiful images you've ever written. And it just brought me to tears. But what you were able to do for your parents, can you tell everybody just a bit about that? Because that was just, what a sweet surprise that was.
Oh, really? So my father loved to travel and my mother hated to travel. She hated it. She had only flown when I was when I became a flight attendant, she'd only flown a couple times when my dad was in the Navy, and they were on like Navy transport planes, like cargo planes, and lots of stops and starts. Didn't fly up at 30,000 feet. Everybody's airsick. And she just had terrible memories and impressions of it. But when I got off probation and I got my tickets, it also included my parents, and your family gets them. And it was September, it was my mom's birthday. And so I went with my parents in first class from Boston to San Francisco. And I'd been laying over in San Francisco a lot that summer. And so I kind of knew the city and I knew good restaurants and I knew how to get around. And so I just took them around, and they were just gobsmacked that this kid who, a year earlier was wearing khaki pants and Izod shirts, going out to pubs and drinking beer and, being a kid, was suddenly taking them to these wonderful restaurants. I remember we went for Thai food and you sat on the floor and my father had trouble getting down and he was just laughing. He's like, hey, look what you've done. Where you took us. And they loved it so much. And they used those passes so much, including one of my favorite times. They wanted to come to New York to visit me. And I was on reserve, which means you have to wait by the phone. When they need you, they call you. And in like 2 hours, you have to be at the airport. I said, I can't. It's my reserve day. And they said, okay, we'll come down and wherever you get sent, we'll go. This is my mother who used to hate to travel. And they drive from Rhode Island, get into my little Bleecker Street apartment. The phone rings and crew scheduling gives me my flight. And I hang up and I say, we're going to Paris. And they're like, let's go. They get on my flight. I worked the flight. It was so fun. Like I was their flight attendant. And one day, one night in Paris, and then they flew back with me. That's how excited they were about it.
And that never would have happened otherwise. I mean, maybe you could have become some well-paid businesswoman in corporate America, but that wouldn't have been you.
No.
It's just so lovely reading the book. Our time is running down, but I have a couple of questions about the process. And having written creative nonfiction for a while myself, I am amazed at what happens with the human memory and the act of writing. So you talked about what you discovered, some of the things you discovered writing Fly Girl. Did something ever surprise you? Did you write a scene that triggered the memory of another moment and then, then that happened? It wouldn't have happened without the writing?
Yeah, all the time. I cannot believe the stuff I excavated. And as you said, I think I'd remember one thing, and then I'd be like, but wait, before that, this happened. And I remembered people so well. And as I said, I did check, double check some of my memories with Diane and my friend Matt, who I flew with all the time. But absolutely, like the discovery was also in what it was like. One thing that really helped was I would watch old TV ads, and TWA had this beautiful one. They played Up and Away was part of and the jet took off. But by watching that, I was like, oh, I remember that was played when we were graduating from Breach Academy. And I remember, so you just began to remember things by looking. I have exactly 4 pictures of me in my uniform, but I dug those out and my graduation picture. And then I could look and I remembered everybody's name. And then stories just started like coming back to me,
And it's very pleasurable, isn't it?
Oh, I loved it. I loved being back in that time. I loved saying hi to that girl that I was.
Well, I love meeting that girl that I did not get to meet. And we were in our, I don't know, what are we? We're in our 40s now. So we met in our 40s. So I was so happy to meet the young Anne, who, I mean, it's really in many ways the portrait of the artist as a young woman. It really is. And I'm moved right now. The interview is just so damn moving. And I, because you're my friend and I love you, I said, wait a minute, am I being moved because it's my friend? No, I'm being moved by where you take us.
Oh, thank you.
Just a wonderful journey. Allison, are you showing up because you're about to give us the hook? Because I have 5 more questions.
That's fine. I'm just rapidly listening whenever you want to wrap up. Go ahead.
I have one more question, Ann Hood.
Yes.
Because you write almost you've published a lot more books of fiction than nonfiction, but you've written so many beautiful essays over the years, really powerful essays. What's the one thing you would say to anyone who's listening, who wants to do both forms, creative nonfiction and fiction?
I have to say, seems like the most basic advice, but do both. When I was writing just fiction and my wonderful first publicist at Doubleday said I should write essays, I thought, I'm a fiction writer. Like, don't pigeonhole yourself. You had that discovery with Townie, didn't you, Andre, where you were like, am I actually writing a memoir? Wait a minute. Do I do that? Should I do that? Do I do that?
But I just wrote novels. Yeah. How do you know?
And don't do it. Explore. I mean, we are so lucky as writers that we have that freedom to write anything. But with both of them, the same thing, right? You have to be brave. You just have to go into it and be fearless.
Well,
that's great.
Thank God for your fearlessness.
Yes. On that note, thank you both so much. What a delightful conversation. I loved it. And I want to just really emphasize what a wonderful memoir this is, and that you can buy it from Book Passage. You can order it online. You can come in and pick it up in person at Corte Madera or San Francisco Ferry Building store, or you can call us and we'll be happy to send you a copy. And if you order now, we have these fun little masks, sleep masks, and postcards, and little passports. So an extra incentive, not that you need it. But
get the goodies.
The goodies are fun as long as they last. Yes. Fabulous book. Great gift for Mother's Day, everybody. It was just a wonderful gift for Mother's Day. Thank you guys again so much. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to whatever next books you're writing in person next time.
Andre, thank you. I love talking to you, sweetheart. I'll see you soon, I hope.
Talking to you too, my friend. And Allison, thank you. Thank you.